Namaste to everyone. Welcome to Sambhashanam in Conversation with series. Today's guest is Professor T.T. Narendran, retired professor from the Department of Management Studies, IIT Madras. Apart from his rich experience in the field of education and teaching, he's also a well accomplished Veena player. Welcome, sir.
Namaste, sir. I'm so happy
Namaste.
that you have joined the conversation series, and I'm so glad to welcome you today. And namaste to all the viewers as well.
Namaste, everyone.
So, sir, you have always been known as a wonderful teacher at IIT Madras. So, can you please tell us about your journey? What inspired you to become a teacher?
Okay. I don't know about the adjectives you used. I leave them with you. Uh, but so far as how I ended up becoming a teacher, well, I tried 2 months of factory work after my undergraduation. And I found that the noise of the machines continued to haunt me even when I went home and played Veena. I thought this won't do. And then I got an admission into IIT for a master's by research, MS by research in industrial engineering. So I went into IIT and I generally like the atmosphere there. So by the time my master's came to an end, I told all my professors that I want to continue for a PhD and become a teacher. And they were quite okay with it. So I joined for a PhD, became a faculty there after some years. And yeah, 38 long years is about how long I've taught.
Can you tell us about any unique incident or any experience which you will always remember? So in your teaching experience, is there anything like that which is always there in your mind and you often recollect?
There aren't particular incidents of that kind, but let me share a little bit. One thing that I noticed was even after 35 years of teaching, sometimes out of the blue would come a question from a student. And what will strike me is, wow, I never looked at it this angle, from this angle, and nobody seems to have thought of it this way all these years. This is an interesting viewpoint. But fortunately, yes, I was able to also, let us say, mull over it and give an answer. But those kind of experience have been there now and then. Some tricky questions from the students, which you have to, let's say, be on your feet to be able to answer. The other kind of interaction with students is helping some of the weaker students, some of them who were, let us say, very low in morale. I remember one incident of that kind. There was a girl who was doing her MA in the humanities department, and for some adventurous reason, she chose to take my elective, which was a little heavy on math by their standards. And while she was a topper in all other subjects, in this one, she wasn't doing well and she was very worried. She came and met me in my room. She broke down. I said, listen, there's something which you can do fairly easily. You go through the worked examples that I've done in the class. After you do each example, just close the book and try to work the same problem out on your own. And if you're able to do it, it gives you confidence and you're absolutely sure when you're right because you have a reference. She followed that and comfortably came through in the end. And after the results came, I remember her father called me from her place and thanked me profusely for having helped her. So there have been incidents like this where, let us say, somebody gets too depressed, either for academic reasons or otherwise, and I've had to counsel them, help them out, guide them. Those kind of incidents exist, yes.
Yes, we can often recollect these kinds of incidents happening in even our colleges and schools when we don't
Okay.
perform well.
Hmm.
So, yes,
Yeah.
so the other thing which comes to my mind is that do you really feel that marks can judge a student? Since you already spoke about this, it just came to my mind. Um, what do you feel about
Oh,
the
yeah.
way students are evaluated and about our education system? And what are your thoughts on it?
I think marks can be taken as a broad indicator. That's about all. And all the students know. In fact, sometimes I've spoken about this openly in class also. The person who helps around the other students the day before the test, uh, clearing doubts for them and solving difficult problems, is the one who doesn't do well in the test next day. The students know about it. The person who helped also knows about it. We know that potential and performance are not always the same. And a teacher should be able to identify these students who have potential even if they don't score high marks every time. And I've had occasions to write about such students when they approach me for a letter of reference when they apply abroad. I've done that, explaining why their grades don't necessarily reflect their ability. What I would
Second,
say is that, one moment, what I would say is we have, let us say, two large classes and we need some kind of a mass production system to keep going. And for that, this kind of the same exam for everybody and we evaluate by marks and based on that we rank them, etc. All that goes on. It's an entirely factory production administrative kind of process. Really, that is not the ideal way of education at all.
and how do you think this can be improved? What do you think can be newly incorporated in our education system? Technical
See,
education, management sciences.
anything that we try to do now will only be window dressing. I doubt if it will get down to the root of the problem. And, you know, I've had a famous reference where they say a student has 8 types of intelligences: word smart, logic smart, picture smart, body smart, music smart, nature smart, people smart, and self smart. Of course, each of these have explanations. But we have, at the moment, the kind of system we have, it's very difficult to, let us say, identify each student's strengths, weaknesses, and orient them accordingly, approach them accordingly. We just don't have the infrastructure for that. We have to radically alter our system. And I think it has to be done with a bit of planning. We can't rush into this without, let's say, and a lot of training is required for the teachers also. Probably a bit of this you may see in some of the ICSE schools. And that too, only those who are not uh, driven by performance. Only those schools which want to make education a pleasure, they have made some attempts in this direction.
Do you feel that online teaching is a good way of passing on knowledge to students? Because that's the only way now
See,
it's happening because of the situation.
yeah, it depends on what level you're talking about. For very small children, I think it's pretty hard. Online is uh, probably not a great way, but then let's also look at it from another point of view. One is, yes, you don't have a choice. This is the only alternative you have. During the Spanish flu of 1918, schools remained shut for 2 years with no way of learning. At least we have online. That's all we can say. So far as that is concerned. But I want to look at it from another angle. All these kids revel in playing, let's say, games, video games, watching videos. And in all of that, they're quite savvy. In fact, they seem to know much more than their elders at home. Can we ingeniously use their aptitude for gadgets to bring in some learning modules which are not the dull drab, let's say, I teach you listen or I lecture you listen? No. Can there be a way by which we can use videos to educate? It can be for sciences, it can be for history. You can use a lot of visuals and help them appreciate better. So this time we were caught unawares, so we weren't quite prepared for how to teach online. Whatever we did in classroom, we are just repeating that over the, let's say, the net. But I think if you design video courses differently, it can reach the children and it can be useful. I must share something else here. At a higher education level, that all learning has to take place in the classroom is an idea of the past. In fact, even about 30, 40 years ago, I remember I had a couple of bright students who said, we would like to excuse ourselves from the classroom. We want to learn from the books. We'll come and write all your tests. And the only thing is the administrative requirement of attendance won't be there. Is it okay with you? I said, fine, let's do it. And they were responsible. They learned from the books. They did as well as the others. So today, you take the status of education and several of the engineering colleges, tier 2, tier 3, whatever you call them. Many of them have faculty of mixed ability, and students are not necessarily interested in listening to them. And they often find that they're able to learn more by listening to video lectures from other sources, and they're able to learn the subject if they want to from those sources. So attending classroom is merely for administrative purposes. There is a minimum attendance requirement, so we'll come and sit in the class. That doesn't mean we learn from the class. And a very pleasant experience with this kind of mode, let me share with you. One of my colleagues at IIT, he has uploaded video lectures on our subject operations research through the IIT's, let's say, tele-educational network program, the NPTEL program as it's called. And he got a mail once from a student in the US saying, sir, the same subject which you have so lucidly explained in the video, for the last 2 months I was struggling with my professor here. I couldn't understand a thing. And then I chanced upon your video and I learned everything so well. What I couldn't learn in 2 months, I could in 2 days thanks to your lectures. Now, that is what video lectures can do, provided you have a quality control over the material that is put on video.
What was your approach to teaching, and how was your rapport with the students? Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah. A little immodestly, I may claim that I was pretty different from most of my colleagues. Let me throw in a few points here. First is remove fear from the student. The student should not be afraid of me. So some of the early messages that I sent across, please don't get up when I walk into the classroom. I happen to be a teacher surely by a chronological accident. I was born some years before you. So I am here as a teacher and you are my students. Otherwise, it need not be so. So this is one. Then a small thing like attendance. I've seen many people would just call out the roll numbers or pass a sheet around, whatever. No, I would spend 5 minutes, call each student, look at his face, try to pick up as many names as I can within a semester. And so I made sure that I made eye contact with the students. I tried to know them personally. And I would also use quite a bit of slang, which they used in IIT, so that they don't feel alienated. So all of this kind of helps. The other thing is always be ready to accept questions. You may not be able to answer every question on the spot. If you're not able to answer, you can still openly say, I'll find out and let you know. You don't lose anything by that, and the student will appreciate you for that. The other thing is, how fast can you go? And every class is mixed, mind you. So I usually make them into three categories. The first one third of the rows in the classroom, the middle and the last. By and large, you target the middle group. So there will be a few students who are very bright who will find you boring and slow. And of course, there is another group in the last row who have switched off. It doesn't matter how well you teach, they're just not going to listen to you. So for the middle group, this went well. And the other thing is, I would look at the faces of the students. I look for reactions. And nothing gives greater pleasure to a teacher than seeing the glow on the faces of students when they understand the concept. So that is where you get your feedback, and that is the reward for teaching. So this is about how I approach students. Stay friendly, don't scare them, don't frighten them, and encourage them. I think they'll come forth. They will make an honest effort to learn. The other thing, of course, was the assessment side. I was notorious for, let us say, spinning stories around questions. You know, in school children say statement sums. I used to build huge stories with some funny names, and some of them found it distracting too. But by and large, I think I struck a balance, mix of easy questions and difficult questions so that even an average student can comfortably get through. But if you want to score full, you have to show more capability. So making them think was part of my, let's say, evaluation. I tried to be as fair as possible, as transparent as possible. I would, after the exam is over, I'd discuss the paper, show the half mark and quarter mark that I award for every step. And I also told them that I look more for conceptual understanding, and sometimes if the numericals are wrong, but the concept is right, I may still give them marks. Of course, with smaller classes, other experiments are possible, giving assignments and sometimes giving different topics to each student, because it means a lot more work evaluating. I've even experimented with take-home exam and then student seminars on a few topics, make them come forth to the front and present a topic before the class. And towards the later years, technology had grown quite a bit. So from the blackboard to the whiteboard to, let us say, the old overhead projector transparent sheet, we came to PowerPoint. And then there was a stage when in the last few years, we had a campus network called Moodle. I could upload the problems, I could upload the notes on the net, and within the campus, all of them could access it. And same way, after an exam was over, the explanation for all the answers would be there. If I gave them an assignment in class, again, just before the exam, I would give the solutions to so that they can check if they were able to do it right. And depending on the subject, yes, there are times when I've used case study and discussion also for my MBA class. One thing is, a lot of these things are changing, and one has to remember that all these subjects are not going to, let's say, remain unchanged over the years. So I do tell them that this stuff could become outdated, so they have to make sure that they always have their learnability so that as subjects scale up, they also learn them. In fact, it happened to me. There were subjects which I had not learned in college, but I had to learn to be able to teach them in later years.
So that was
A
so
a
good.
small point, it would make, I have even had this benefit. There have been days when I would go to the classroom with a headache or sometimes a mild stomach ache. At the end of the classroom, I'd feel perfectly fine at the end of the class. So the profession gave me more than, let's say, just satisfaction for the job. Even physically, sometimes it seemed to have helped me.
So I think it was that inner joy which used to come when you would teach. So like you
Yeah,
gave the example of your headache just vanishing.
yeah.
So do you have any message to convey to the people in the field of education, teaching, and to students? What do you feel can make teachers better? What are the qualities in a teacher which are very important according to you?
One thing which I have noticed as a student, undergrad student, we have had some very good teachers who who didn't have a great command over English. Okay, but then I still remember a teacher who would meticulously write on the blackboard. He could explain whatever he wrote, and the concepts were very clear. It didn't matter that his English was not so great. What mattered was he conveyed the subject, he kept us interested, and we loved him. So, most important, I think, is clarity. Clarity of thought, clarity of communication. It doesn't mean high sounding English. It simply means in simple language you have to explain. And the more important thing is psychologically. Too many of my colleagues, let's say, they distance themselves from the teacher, from the students. That I think is avoidable. The colleges themselves will have to work towards creating an atmosphere of teachers and students getting together, being a lot more friendly with each other, and that would go a long way in, let us say, uh, keeping the students more motivated towards learning rather than a hostile, disciplinary, military kind of attitude in a campus. At least I'm not for that kind of approach.
So that's really nice to know about your approach towards teaching and your rapport with the students. Uh, that's really nice. And so now we'll move on to another topic which is also equally important to you, and I know it's always been a part of your life, which is music. have also been a Veena artist, that is, you play the Veena, and music has been a part of you from your childhood. So, can you tell us about your association with music?
Early childhood, it was the old lacquer record, 78 RPM records played on a gramophone. And my earliest memory is of M.S. Subbulakshmi singing Yaro Ivar Yaro in Bhairavi. And that was probably the first raga that I got to identify as a toddler. Uh, yeah, so as I grew up, there was this atmosphere of listening to records. My mother used to play the veena, and later on, my cousins also were learning veena. So I grew up in this kind of atmosphere, and I got interested. Then over the years, I started trying to play the veena myself. My father noticed it and dragged me to my mother's teacher. So he took me under his tutelage and taught me for a good 10 years. And around that time, there was a break. I had finished my undergraduation at Guindy Engineering College, which is now Anna University, and moved to IIT. And then another thought struck me. I thought, shall I try learning from a vocalist? And my veena was the Shruti of the veena was a D sharp, which was Rendra Katta. I noticed that Vidwan Chengalput Sri Ranganathan had the same D sharp pitch. Plus, for me, Laya was a weak point. I went with the hope that he would probably set it right for me. So initially he was very hesitant, but then he agreed. He came, and the deal was this. I said, I'll try to play whatever you sing. And unless you're satisfied, don't give up thinking it won't come in the veena. If I feel that it cannot be reproduced on the veena, I'll say so. Until then, don't give up. I don't think we had any occasion where I gave up. So it went well, and a good 25 years that way. But this is about my learning of music. In the last 10 years or so, yes, I also started teaching a few. And now, of course, everybody is online. One of them is in Germany. The other was in Trivandrum. Currently, COVID has shifted her to Trichy. But whether they are in Chennai or outside, the mode of teaching now is only online. Listening to live concerts started around the early 60s. I used to go to the music academy. So I have heard at least, let's say, three generations of musicians. And somewhere around 1968, another small sabha started with a very interesting setting. A dingy hall, jamakadams are spread out on the floor for us to squat. Ceiling fans were not there. Handheld fans, the panka or the visiri, whatever you call that. And this was how we listened to many concerts, but many of them were memorable. So those were the days. And then as we moved around to, let us say, full-scale evolution from thatch roof pandals to air-conditioned halls and with high fidelity speakers and whatnot. A lot of these things change with times. The other significant part is when I went to IIT, I got associated with the music club at IIT, which had started a few months before I went there. So there I was a student volunteer. Then as I became a, let's say, faculty member there, I got to become secretary. Then I was president of the music club for well over 20 years. And that was one institution which I think I ran to my satisfaction. Of course, seasons varied, times varied, the crowd varied. There were times when uh, a very, let us say, orthodox singing M.D. Ramanathan could fill uh, a good part of the hall. And there were also times when musicians whom we thought were popular, and we had the embarrassment of seeing 30 people in the audience and that kind of, even smaller numbers at times. So audience turnout fluctuated from very high to very low, and we had to live with that. In later years, that became more of the rule, that most of the concerts had thin attendance. There was also a demotivator, but financially we were just about okay. I must mention that a lot of musicians obliged by not demanding what they would get elsewhere. They were happy to come to IIT and perform. So it was a nice experience. Running a music club also at IIT. The other part is, of course, reviewing. I was with the Shruti magazine in its formative years. I was even part of an interview which tried to talk to musicians to get their opinions about the role of accompaniments in a concert. And different people had different views. We put together and brought an article out at that time. In later years, over the last 10 years or so, yes, I was reviewing the season, I've written about a few musicians. In fact, one of the major stories that I wrote was about the Alathur brothers. So, of course, I was not the only one. A couple of people had preceded me. They had contributed quite a bit. But for my part, I also went and met family members, communicated with some of them over email, collected quite a bit of material. And Shruti published it in 2 issues. So it was a nice experience, so to say. So far as review writing is concerned, my objective is to be unbiased. I do not know how successful I was, but by and large, I used to say this even to the musicians I reviewed, that I take a profit and loss approach or a balance sheet approach. What you did well, I'll record that you did well. And what you didn't do so well, I'll record that also as scope for improvement or not so good. This is what was there for me as, let us say, critic
How
or
do you
review.
Yeah. How do you feel that Carnatic music has changed over the times? Say how the artists were singing in the 1950s, 60s, and then
I
later
would
on.
say
Yeah.
quite a bit actually. Uh, one must also notice here that not many had a very high level of formal education in the older generations, whereas today possibly everybody has gone to, let's say, good schools, they're quite savvy. And so this is one side. The social background, educational background has changed over the last 5 decades. So far as concerts are concerned, the first casualty is duration. Uh, Even I've heard about 4-hour concerts or more, but by the time I started listening, it had come down to 3 hours. But there were many evening concerts. I remember in the city suburbs where the concert would start at 6 o'clock and end at 9 o'clock, and people didn't mind. Whereas in later years, I found that once it is 8 o'clock, everybody becomes restless. They want to get up and go. So I don't know what the reasons are. Maybe there are more challenges of transport or the security is less. I'm not sure. I remember the days when Music Academy, the night concert would start at 9 o'clock, and there were special buses waiting at the academy premises, or just outside, to ferry passengers after the concert. Now, all of that seems unthinkable today. And as I said, people don't want to be out so late in the day for a concert. That's how it appears. So that has changed. Now, let us come to the content of the concerts. In the 60s, I think almost every concert had a Ragam Tanam Pallavi. And gradually, as the time factor came in, the Pallavi shrunk and vanished also from many sabhas. Uh, the other thing is, the longer concert gave a lot more space. You could have an elaborate raga alapana, and you could comfortably sing Neraval, Swaram, in the slow paced, fast paced. For everything, there was time. And there was a certain completeness, fullness about it. And once the time pressure started, the, the later musicians had to worry about where they could save on time. So for some of them, Varnam was dropped, some of them dropped Pallavi, and in some cases, a fast Neraval or drop Neraval, or directly go to this thing, the faster Swaras. And another interesting approach, which I noticed, though I am not very comfortable with it, starting a kriti from the Anupallavi instead of starting from the Pallavi, because you save some time on that. And sometimes it's made me wonder that the musician wants to showcase his or her ability to elaborate a raga to sing for us. The kirtana is incidental, it comes in between. Let's try to get through with it as quickly as possible. So while the older generation would elaborately sing sangatis and each sangati twice, and the mridangist would go along merrily contributing his bit to enhancing the song, all of this went. The approach now became how can I save time on the kritis? And the disciplined, ordered rendering of sangatis vanished. It gradually shifted more towards a ghazal type of approach with a few flowery brigas oriented sangatis coming in here and there. The motive seemed to be somehow impress the audience, right? In Tamil we say Brahmikka Vekkiradu. So this, what should I say? The sensational element became more important. What I do feel, of course, as it has come around now, in many cases, I find that the approach to raga alapana is rather scale-based, swara-based, and I'm missing the phrases. I don't get the, let's say, feeling of completeness in the raga alapanas. What has improved is there is enormous sensitivity to the lyrics. More and more people are trying to pronounce the lyrics correctly, try not to split the words, and so on. Only thing is, I'm afraid that has been overdone. And sometimes it seems to be Sahityam at the expense of Sangeetam. I don't know if people would agree with me on that, but that's a feeling I got. I feel there are times when, like our Hindustani counterparts say, you can sacrifice Sahityam for the sake of Sangeetam. To me, that's okay. But today, to a vast majority of people, that's not okay. And remember, most of the audience don't understand the lyrics that you're singing at most places. And still, there is this obsession with lyrics. The other thing I noticed is a lot of kids sing today, and I see them on YouTube, 3-minute, 5-minute, 10-minute packages, one song, beautifully orchestrated with nice visuals, natural setting. It's an excellent package, very impressive. And the children are very talented, their voices are very facile. They can negotiate gamakas, they can negotiate brikas. They make a great impression. The only problem is, if I put them to a full-fledged concert, can they sustain it? And if so, how long can they sustain it? I noticed one case at least where a kid, for first 45 minutes, he was in tremendous control, and after that, there came a heavy, let's say, a heavier raga, and the poor child couldn't measure up to the rigors of that raga. So I felt a little sad that day. I do feel that with the current pressures, it doesn't give anybody time to introspect, to gain insights on a raga. And it looks like even the public at large are not interested in listening to abstract sounds in the name of alapana. So that's one aspect of music which I'm worried about. Uh, Either it is going scale based or what should I say, gymnastics based with a lot of vocal acrobatics being displayed. But I'm missing the bhavam, missing the insight in many cases. And I don't know if it can be arrested at all if the public at large seem to like only that kind of stuff. So
So
I don't know.
this brings a question to me. So music, as you told us about concerts and where you gave an example of a kid who could not sustain beyond 45 minutes. So is music becoming more performance oriented these days rather than actually understanding the nuances and becoming good enough to
Probably
perform? So I
see,
think you get what
what do
I'm
you
saying.
want of, what would one want out of music? You've got to make a living out of it, then you need fame. You need public adoration. And I mean, even in the earlier generations, musicians have admitted that they've had to compromise for the sake of pleasing the audience. So this is not that something new. At any time, if you're a performer in public, you have to make compromises. The question is, have public taste gone down so much that the compromise also has gone to that extent? That's the only worry. And yeah, it looks like very introspective music these days may not find too many takers unless it comes from a big name. So that is a cause for worry. We used to say there must be Vishranti. Can you give a feeling of relaxation while singing? And even some of the talented kids, sometimes they seem to be in a hurry to pour all their ideas out. They're not able to take this approach of relax a bit. I mean, sometimes even silence is music. The pause that you give between phrases. But the pressure that time puts on you, it doesn't let you relax. And then there is inside you the need to impress your audience. So all of these contribute to, let us say, more of sensational music and less of music that can reach the heart.
So, sir, would you like to tell or give a message to the students of music? What is it you would like to convey?
Well, it's not acceptable if I say, don't be looking for stage all the time. In fact, they're not looking for stage now. They say that we'll record it and upload it on social media and we'll get fame. And it's happening. The only thing I could say is, please, ragas are not just arohanam and avarohanam. Ragas don't rest on swaras. Ragas rest on phrases. Try to understand the kritis as were rendered in the yesteryears. Listen to different kritis in the same raga and see what the key phrases of the raga are. Try to get an insight into a raga. You may not be able to learn many like this, but the few that you learn will still be worth it. But please, ragas go far beyond the scale, or at the learning stage you may need them. Introspect on your music. I would say it's not a bad idea if you even listen to some of your recordings and evaluate yourself. It's not a bad idea at all. You will know where you stand when you listen to your music. So that is one. The other is, yeah, get into what you're singing, get into the song. That's the advice. So that you give it the real feel. That people are able to do, but that is the message I would like to get across to everyone, that get involved with your singing. That is important. And so far as your audience is concerned, to some extent it is necessary to impress the audience, but please don't overdo it. And don't play too much to the gallery. Try to maintain a balance. That would be my advice.
Sir, thank you so much. It was really nice knowing about your association with music.
One last point. I'd say this. There is no musician who deserves blind admiration. There can be flaws in every musician, past or present, but we have to look at them with great respect. At the same time, not losing sight of a few flaws that they may have. And we take the best from every person and then evolve our own music. But mind you, let not your adoration or admiration make you blind to the faults of your heroes or heroines. Always keep a intellectually sharp, open eye for faults, whether it is your singing or whether it's others singing. Please try to retain that objectivity, the critical faculty in you to be right as much as you can. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. That was such a good message to all students of music. And I think definitely following all these will make students much better, more better musicians. And it was really nice knowing about your journey as a teacher and also as a Bainika. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for joining my conversation.
Yeah. Thank you.